JP back later in the programme.
Now sometimes there's a moment, a split second, which redefines the rest of life. For Martin Spinelli, an academic, it was when police came to the lobby of the hotel where he was preparing to give a lecture and told him his wife Sasha had died in a car crash and his 4-year-old son Leo was in a coma. Well, Leo spent nearly 3 months in hospital and he managed a recovery that seemed to mystify his doctors and certainly gave Martin hope for both their futures. And Martin's joined us in the Saturday Live studio this morning. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, Sean.
Thank you very much for coming. Paint a picture first of life before the accident. What was your family like?
Life before the accident was pretty good now that I think about it. Sasha and I were academics. We met at the University of Sussex in graduate school. I ended up getting a job in New York. She had a job in Canterbury. We did the transatlantic thing for several years. Then we had a child, decided that the transatlantic thing was no longer going to work for us. So we set to work trying to find a job on the same side of the ocean. And I ended up getting a very good job at the University of Sussex. Our careers were blossoming. I had lots of articles in all the top journals in the field. I had my own broadcasts going out around the world. Sasha was an extremely accomplished Shakespearean scholar with several books and a glittering career in front of her as well. And our son Leo was always there and was the joy of our lives. Up until one September morning in 2006.
And what happened?
Well, I left my wife Sasha. She dropped me off at the train station in Lewis. I caught a train up to Sunderland, where I was scheduled to give a keynote lecture at a really big media conference. 2 police officers tracked me down in my hotel room. I was getting ready to go to the conference venue, and I knew something was wrong instantly, because they lacked that confidence that I was used to seeing in police officers. They couldn't look me in the eye, and they said, "Are you Martin Spinelli?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, we have some very sad news. There's been an accident on the M2 in Kent. Your wife has been killed, and your son Leo has been very, very badly injured." They raced me to the airport, sirens blaring. I flew down to Heathrow. More police ferried me to King's College Hospital, where I found my only son, Leo, in pediatric intensive care, surrounded by a halo of computer screens under an air blanket regulating his body temperature, because the part of his brain that took care of body temperature had been damaged. His muscles were clenched tight like steel bands, and in that moment there, looking at him on the hospital bed, with his head shaven, with a fractured skull, with severe brain damage, with a terribly shattered and mutilated left leg, everything was erased.
And the doctors were telling you about his condition with some level of, I don't know whether you'd call it brutal honesty, certainly giving you the facts in no uncertain terms, because you've written about it in a book. There is a good chance Leo will die. He has fractures of skull and bleeding in his brain. You should consider donating his organs. How did you deal with those, well, what the doctors were telling you? I mean, did you have to prepare yourself? I
didn't want to believe it. I remember that moment so vividly in a little conference room across the corridor from the intensive care ward where Leo was. And I remember when the doctor told me to prepare for the likelihood of him dying, I remember shooting up out of the chair and going and facing the corner and not wanting any of this to be happening, not wanting to listen to the doctor. And I was sobbing, and I finally pulled myself together, and I turned again to the doctor and I said, "Okay, if everything goes right, if everything goes as well as you could possibly imagine it going, what's the best case scenario?" And she said, "Well, maybe, perhaps, possibly, one day he might be able to attend a school for the severely mentally handicapped. But," she said, I have to warn you that that seems extremely unlikely. The next morning, Leo was still with us. He was still alive. He did not die. And I took from the simple fact that he was still alive, the simple fact that he had already defied that first expectation laid at his feet, that anything was possible in his recovery, that we could get somewhere that this one particular doctor wasn't able to see at the moment. And in fact, the neurologist who I met shortly after, who was in charge of Leo's care, said, look, let's just kind of slow down and put all of those other prognoses to one side. The only thing that we can say for certain about his recovery is that it will be measured in months and years, not days and weeks. And with that little bit of uncertainty, he gave me a tremendous gift. He gave me a sense that, well, if we just create some kind of vision in our minds of a better place than where we are now, and we focus on that and we work towards that in therapy, in massages, in reading to him, in talking to him, then that's where we should be directed, and that's how we proceeded.
I've noticed in situations like that, when I've encountered people who've experienced something unthinkable and awful, that you kind of you latch on to whatever sense you can in those situations, because the truth of what's happening is so big and so intractable that it's not something that we like to think we handle situations, but actually you're in a situation which handles you, I think, and it's that odd feeling that this is stuff that's happening to you and you just have to sort of make the best of it you can.
Yeah, and ironically, bizarrely, marvelously, I now think of those moments in the hospital, particularly those first weeks and that first month. I think about that time with a bit of nostalgia, because I had this clarity of purpose. I had this sense of what I was meant to be doing without doubt, without second guessing. For the first time in my life, all of that extraneous stuff was just cleared away. The mortgages, taxes, insurance, all career, all of that stuff, just it wasn't as if my life had changed. It was it had never existed, and I was just there with my son, working to get him out the hospital door, and those were some of the most fulfilling, rewarding, and even happiest days of my life.
Your wife, Sasha, said something to you which now looks very prescient before she died, telling you to keep the pessimistic culture away.
Yeah.
Of Britain. She felt that pessimism invades our culture, and you as an American thought differently. Do you think it's interesting that she should say that?
It was absolutely uncanny.
2 weeks before she died.
Yeah. Absolutely uncanny. And that's the last thing that she says to me at the station in Lewis as she's dropping me off and drives off on her way to work in Canterbury. She says, don't let these pessimistic Brits get you down, and which was bizarre to me. It was apropos of nothing. I was an accomplished academic. She was an accomplished academic. We thought of ourselves as a bit cynical. We thought of ourselves as good at judging foolishness and criticizing foolishness where we found it. We thought of ourselves as pessimistic.
And of being masters and mistresses of our own destiny and fates. Something like this happens and you realise, in fact, how vulnerable you are to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what happened? You were looking at the medical formulas and the bar graphs, and they gave you one scenario. What was pushing you forward? And did you see any change in Leo day to day?
I did. Every day, or almost every day, there was a tiny incremental step forward. A loosening of his muscles, a moving of his limbs, a flickering of his eyelids. And with each one of those little moments, with each one of those little steps forward, Leo pulled me ahead. He gave me encouragement. He gave me energy. He gave me something to maintain this vision and maintain this newly discovered positive attitude, which I was using to organize the work that I was doing with him and to help get us to the door. It was a kind of reciprocal relationship where he was pulling me along emotionally and psychologically and spiritually, and I was pulling him along physically and with therapy.
When did you decide to tell him about what had happened to his mother?
That was incredibly hard. That was the hardest and darkest moment in the whole of the story. We had been there for about a month. Leo was just edging his way out of coma, and the end of a coma is not at all like it appears on EastEnders. You're not kind of waking up 1 minute in the hospital bed and driving home the next. It's a very, very slow process which kind of unfolds gradually over days and weeks. And he was gradually becoming more conscious. He was regaining his ability to speak. He was asking questions, and the question he was asking the most is, "Where is Mama?" And I had organized with my family and with the nurses and doctors and therapists in the hospital that I didn't want to tell him yet. I didn't want to tell him where Sasha was, what had happened to her. So I started telling him that his mother was in another hospital nearby. She wasn't doing as well as he was. Nobody could go and see her. But the questions got more and more persistent and more insistent. And finally, I gave in to the pressure that I was feeling from everyone around me. And I thought, okay, well, we just have to bite the bullet, and we just have to tell him. So I booked a little room in the child psychiatry ward at King's. And I rolled him in on his wheelchair one day, and I sat him on my lap, and he had this external fixator on his leg with these bars that were prodding into him and prodding into me, kind of into his bone, uncomfortable situation for us both. We started playing with a little dollhouse there and the dolls in the dollhouse. And I told him, I said, "Leo, I've got something very, very sad to tell you about Mama." I said, "She's no longer with us. She died in the crash. She's passed away." And he didn't take it in at first. He just carried on playing as if I'd said nothing. And I thought, well, what do? Do I back up? Would we put it off again? And I thought, no, we're here. We might as well. We have to push on, and I have to make it sink in. So I repeated again and again and again that his mother had passed away, and he finally got it. He finally absorbed it, and he just started howling. And it was horrendous. It was a deep abyss, and I was unsure whether or not we were ever going to pull ourselves out of it, because I tried to avoid delivering this psychological blow. Yes. Because I felt that blow when the police told me about it in Sunderland. I didn't want him to suffer a psychological blow on par with his first. And he's going through so much anyway. Exactly.
2 months and 20 days after the accident, Leo obviously knows about what happened in the crash, knows what happened to his mum, has been rebuilding. As you say, you had a life spent threading beads and doing puzzles and doing speech exercises. And then he goes to school.
Oh my God! Yeah.
What was that like for him?
School in the hospital, or the school, his mainstream school?
Mainstream school, which you never thought he would be able to go to a mainstream school.
It was remarkable. It was a day of such tremendous joy and good feeling, and I appreciated that moment, that first day of school for a child. He was meant to start school 4 days after the accident had happened. That was when his school year was about to start, and every new parent with a child just about to enter school is filled with a bit of excitement and a bit of trepidation about this first day and how the child is going to do and what school is going to be like, and they want them to be really fulfilled. But for me, in that situation, on that day, having been told that day would never happen, that we would never get there, to be there on the playground, seeing him in his blue and red raincoat, surrounded by friends, kind of with a slightly perplexed, slightly happy look on his face, with his book bag in one hand and his yellow Zimmer frame in the other, is just such a moment of beauty that I can barely describe it even today.
He's 10 now.
He is.
How is he?
He is unbelievably good. He has, needless to say, defied all of those early expectations. Last spring, he did his grade 3 piano exam and got distinction. And I was incredibly proud. And last summer, his class, like lots of other schools in the area, does this online maths times table challenge. And in the summer term, he not only had the highest score in his class, but he also beat the score of the head teacher at the school. So it is such a marvellous place where we're at now.
Martin, thank you very much, and do give our best to Leo. Martin's book is called After the Crash, and it is a remarkable read. Thank you very much for being with us this morning, Martin
Thanks for having me.
Spinelli.